I'm Rick Friedman. I am a recovering Fed. I used to work for CMS, Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, where I worked primarily on the Medicaid side on IT, and have had the pleasure of working with Daniel and a whole host of people in the room over the years. So it's really wonderful. I feel honored to be here at this symposium with the folks in this room. The opportunities that California has to make a difference in the lives of Californians is huge. And beyond that, because I think California is such a significant player as a state in this country, the work that you are undertaking and the opportunities that you have, I think will influence the rest of the country. There are a number of states that are engaged in interoperability efforts, those that have received administration from children and family grants, like Illinois, and we're grateful to have Illinois represented here today as well, but several others. And states like Virginia, it doesn't matter if you're red or blue or purple, everybody, I think, understands and appreciates the value of interoperability. Sharing data, trying to be client-centric, and from my perspective at least, this is the time to do it. I distributed on the tables, if you just take a second to look at this yellow sheet of paper. In 1967, Martin Luther King was leading not so much civil rights at that point as trying to end the war in Vietnam. And being a Vietnam veteran, I appreciated his efforts. But he emphasized the fierce urgency of now and how important it is to take advantage of the hour that we're living in, whenever that hour is, and to try to make a difference. And I think he said it so well that I wanted to just copy that down and share it with folks. It's as applicable today in California for the efforts that you are undertaking as it was back then. I also appreciated something else he said from the steps of the Lincoln Memorial: free at last, thank God Almighty, free at last. That applied to me when I left CMS about a year ago. So he always was one of my heroes, but certainly a very articulate person. We are very fortunate to have a panel this afternoon that can speak, I think, to making the case for what it really means to have interoperability and information sharing here within California and what it can mean in the lives of people. Our first speaker is Will Lightbourne, who I'm sure doesn't need much introduction to this audience, but he is the director of the California Department of Social Services. I was reading his bio, and you should, when you have a chance, read the bios of these folks. It's very impressive. In Will's case, he had been the director of 3 different counties, right, in terms of social services. So if you thought it was bad in your county, try doing it 3 times. Just amazing. Justice Huffman also has a really very distinguished career, and I think has drunk the Kool-Aid long before the rest of us thought we were inventing it, in terms of the value of sharing data, in terms of what it means for the courts, for informed judgments for people like himself and others around the state and around the country. When you're trying to make decisions that affect the lives of children, their parents and their caregivers, in the absence of having information that actually exists but hasn't been adequately shared. So I think hearing from him will be terrific. And Richard Gold is one of those people that has been on the long march for a very long time in terms of privacy, confidentiality. He spent more than 30 years in the legal profession, worked for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and his heart is in the right place relative to child welfare, foster care, and the rest of it. So let me turn this over to Will. Will? Great.
Thanks, everyone, and good afternoon. I just want to say something about Rick Friedman. He's one of these people whom every time I lose the thread of what it was we were talking about, I always sort of check back with Rick and whether it's in his role, his old role with CMS, when he sort of created much of what we are now talking about, or the concepts of it, or more recently some of the work he's been doing with the American Public Human Services Association. Rick is sort of one of those people who keep pointing us towards a North Star, and so it's a delight to be with him, and of course. Justice Huffman, I've worked with on the Blue Ribbon Commission, and someone of great esteem. I guess from my perspective, first I want to just acknowledge being in some ways totally unequal to this task. My knowledge and familiarity with anything to do with technology gets very limited very quickly. Some of the technology people from Santa Clara County are here. They will say, yeah, he doesn't know nothing about it, as will some of the people from CDSS are here. However, this whole notion of data information sharing, interoperability, is an issue of greater and greater importance for, I would say, a number of reasons. First, our society has over a long time become much more complex, and what we know, quote unquote, has become much more specialized. So that sort of concept of, well, everybody more or less knows everybody else and sort of knows their whole universe that they're living in isn't true anymore at all. I mean, and it's so obvious it almost doesn't bear saying, but let's just note it. Something else that has changed is our expectations in many respects get higher. As evidence-based practice and other information starts to become known to us, I think we look at our systems and we say, we think they should do better, or they should do well, at least. And that means we look more and more to outcomes as an understanding of how they're doing, as opposed to just the products, the inputs, as what we count, and actually figuring out what those outcomes are and measuring them and being able to account for those metrics is really hard without making movement from where we are now. And the third reason it's increasingly important is because the technology is such that we don't really have the excuses we used to have for why we don't share information or work with information better. And then there's the fact that we are in a moment of opportunity, given Affordable Care Act and the extraordinary federal interest, even during the federal budget problems and reductions, in continuing to support these efforts. So those line up as what I see as being sort of the importance of the moment. The underlying issues and problems that we still carry with us that I was trying to tick off in my mind were, first, we developed in silos, and in almost all cases with our own focus, our own resources, and at different times. And we developed our infrastructure by those precepts, and it was somewhat opportunistic when money was available, and we were meeting the need that was right in front of us at the time. As a result, the systems we were creating weren't designed to be coextensive with other systems, and to ensure that they wouldn't be, we built our own cultures and our own languages in our systems, so that even when there was a desire to, the same things didn't mean the same things in different places. And so then we also, of course, assumed that our purposes, whatever they were, took priority over anybody else's purposes. Of course they did, because we were looking at it through our eyes. And we also assumed our information was much more sacred than anybody else's information, for more or less the same reasons. And then we got a lot of rules and laws in place to assure that that would occur. So it's, where we've got to is sort of, I think, quite natural, and the steps to get out of it won't be necessarily easy. And it's interesting when I think to myself about that sort of separated culture, separated language, separated strands of information. Even in combined systems, in some counties, some states have done a lot of creative work about joining organizations together. It's interesting that the information flows still stop at the boundaries of the agency frequently. And so you'll see situations where child welfare and behavioral health and public health or something are put in the same agency, and they share information very well. But if they're separate from the public assistance departments, for some reason it's just a fascinating dynamic. So if we were starting from scratch, we would do it right? In a funny way, we sort of are almost possibly starting from scratch again, just given those momentary sort of changes that we're in this window of. Both because of technology and resources, but also because I think our policy and priority needs are aligning right now, at least in California, in a way that is useful for this conversation. And let me just use a few examples, and not intended to in any way be exhaustive. On the public assistance side of CDSS, what I look at all day, for example, if we look at our CalFresh program, we're very conscious that our supplemental nutrition assistance program to people from federal backgrounds, our participation rate in California is probably the lowest in the country still. And that's somewhere in the mid 50% range of people who are eligible for the program not getting it. As we look at what is going to occur with Medicaid expansion under ACA, assuming that the necessary budgetary agreements are reached in the weeks ahead up here in the Capitol, that is going to add a large number of people, most of whom have similar eligibility dimensions to the CalFresh program. And so the need in terms of helping address issues of poverty in California, the fact that 40% of potentially eligible households are not receiving food benefits, aligns with I think the possibility of, if we can determine ways to get our automation systems to communicate information effectively, I think we have an opportunity there to meet a policy end through the opportunities at hand. Looking at our home and community-based services programs and managed care and the movement of those into managed care along with long-term services and supports like acute care and nursing care, if we have the right information systems and the right universal assessment tools, we have the opportunity to capture savings from the deep-end, expensive institutional care that most people would prefer not to be involved in, and instead support home and community-based services that allow people who are disabled or elderly, et cetera, to remain safely at home. In the child welfare services side, we're at the implementation stage of the KTA settlement that will bring child welfare services and mental health services together for a large subclass of the child welfare foster care population. In order to do this, we require a statewide data-informed system of accountability and communication, both so as to improve data exchange and matching, but also to determine what progress are being made towards implementing the intensive care coordination and the intensive home-based services, and determining how youth are actually accessing the services with what frequency, et cetera. So what all of these have in common is, from my perspective, is placing the client at the center of the conversation and building the information out from the client. And whether it's bringing the SOAS system and the CalHERS system together, or it's bringing universal assessment into the CMIPS-2 system for home and community-based services, or in the child welfare services new system, the replacement for CWS CMS, these offer opportunities to help us end the functional silos while still preserving organizational coherence. The problem is if we add all the organizations that are involved in this conversation together and say just be one organization so you all own the same information, you have an organization that can't focus and probably doesn't function. We still need help, I think, on silos that we have not yet necessarily identified all the strategies for, particularly child welfare and education. Working our way through the FERPA dimensions is something which remains a challenge. Some of the human service and health service information, we still have to negotiate the HIPAA, CMIA sorts of dimensions. But whether we're talking data sharing, information sharing, interoperability, or actual integration, at the bottom of it, I think we start by saying that our intention is to develop a culture of communication, something where it's assumed that we share information and we work on coordinating services for people based on shared information rather than starting from the assumption that we don't. And I think that's one of the first big steps we've got to sort of get past, which is just the assumption that we're going to do it. One of the things we've been working with on the child welfare side is an initiative called the Quality Parenting Initiative to strengthen how we recruit, select, prepare, and then work with and partner with alternative care providers, foster care providers. And one of the issues that has interestingly come up in working with the foster parent community is why do the social workers start from the assumption they can't tell us anything about the child, or can't tell us anything about the circumstances under which the child was removed, because we can't provide care to that child if we don't know the child's needs. And it's interesting, as we sort of unbundled it, the presumed safety zone was not to share information, as opposed to the presumed safety zone being to share information so that a real partnership can exist. And so we've been working with counties and preparing sort of advisory information notices to help them see the path to better we err on the side of looking at the circumstance through the eyes of this child and what information will help the child get the care and the services they need, rather than preserve the institutional interests or prerogatives of the institution itself. So without sort of rattling on too much, let me sort of conclude by sort of saying the things that I think we stand to gain from this, and the proof of concept that is part of this project, I think is a very good example, is if we can get to a point where we're able not just to see information, but actually to use information through systems, both the information that's contained in the health system and information in the child welfare system, and share that information with the bench, who has to take responsibility for final decisions in this. I think we wind up at the end of the day with a system that is more focused on meeting the child's needs than what we have now. So with that, let me stop, turn it over to Justice Huffman, and then we'll talk more.
Thanks, Will. I always enjoy participating with Will. He and I have been involved with this subject matter, child welfare, for some period of time. And he described a number of things very well. For example, he described the court system. He didn't really know that, because it growed one day, and within the last 20 years, we've gone from 220 separate court systems funded by some crazy quilt method to only 58 county courts of theoretically a part of one court system, sort of funded with state money and fees and other things, and a series of historical anomalies. And as those grew up, they created their various data systems, none of which communicated with any other. They were largely inconsistent. Their data units were typically different. You couldn't find out how many children were in care in any given court at a given time, and you certainly couldn't compare what one had to the other, because they may be counting them differently if they counted them at all. If you were in one part of the court, you may not be able to communicate with another part of the court, such as criminal versus juvenile, and certainly not within the districts of the court, and heaven forbid you try to communicate with anybody in the outside world. So that's the platform on which the court was structured. So we have our own problems, and I recognize, first of all, I'm happy to be included. If Will is not a high-tech guy, I want you to know I still am working on this as an information system. I know the courts are only a small part of your overall needs for data sharing and interoperability involving health and human services for families and children around this country, around this state. But we do get heavily involved with the lives of the families and children that come into our court system, and we clearly and painfully aware that we can't really do our job to do the best we can for those families who are all in crisis when they reach our courts without information. And that's become, as you all know, a increasingly difficult challenge, and I'm so happy that you folks are here to continue the discussion on this subject. I've been a member of the California Blue Ribbon Commission on Children in Foster Care since 2006, and have been privileged to be the chair since 2011. So I've had an opportunity to step out of my silo to look at issues of data sharing, and to some extent in the child welfare area and the courts. It is an example of where sharing is not a privilege, it's a necessity. We have to work with the social services, the educators, the doctors, the healthcare providers, the attorneys, and all of the people that make up this complex process. We really aren't in charge of any of them, and we can't force them to do things. And so we've learned we have to work together, and we're eager to do that. One of the key recommendations of the Blue Ribbon Commission at when it made its report was to have increased work on sharing information to promote better decision making, to be better informed about what are the needs of the children, what are the restrictions or limitations. And remember, our families come to us not just in the family court or in the juvenile dependency court or the juvenile delinquency court, but they show up in the domestic violence court. There are portions of their work in the criminal courts, and sometimes all of the above within a given set of families, with the children having health needs, education needs, and the families having their own problems with poverty, unemployment, mental health difficulties, and all that comes with that form of crisis. As many of you know, we certainly have suffered a number of setbacks in the court system, one of the biggest which, with our recommendations, is a decision the judicial branch made last year to stop the deployment of the California case management system. That was a system that, it works, incidentally, just that's the news. We can't afford it, but it works. But it was a place where we not only would be able to have uniform data gathering and case management within the court system, but we could share with the Department of Social Services, the Child Welfare, the Attorney General, all the people that we should interface with. Unfortunately, that has been stopped, and the implications of that are not good from the standpoint of the courts as participants in a rational discussion, because our individual courts have systems that are, as I can think of one county, right after we stopped this, we had to buy them a new case management system because the elderly gentleman who was the only person left who understood how to reprogram or whatever that thing was, retired and left the county. That's the state of the art in many of these counties. And so these case management systems are getting replaced by off-the-shelf models or things that are whomped up by one group or another, and they don't talk to each other in all likelihood, and they don't meet the kind of needs that you're talking about. But we know we need help from you, and we need the information from you. We have, in the Blue Ribbon Commission here at our annual meeting just earlier this month, endorsed the statement of the Child Welfare Council, the statement on information sharing, data standardization, and interoperability. And that statement acknowledges the importance of accessing and using standard information sharing frameworks, models, and data elements. And it recognizes and envisions an inclusive, integrated state and local information technology strategy that leverages support and improving the care provided for children and families holistically by addressing timely program data such as education, mental health, substance abuse, primary health care, and others. And we've endorsed that in the manner of changing all of our recommendations to include the Child Welfare Council statement as our North Star as far as the needs in our area of families and children. And we are going to take that recommendation to the Judicial Council in the summer this year, so that we hope the judicial branch will also join with the Child Welfare Council and put whatever weight we can behind this need. And let me comment just for a minute on the importance. I mean, you folks are dealing with the lives of people in our communities every day. And looking at it from the judicial branch, which covers, of course, a lot of the public's needs, I think that the area where our courts deal with our families and the children in our communities is, in my view, the most important work that the court system does. The people that are charged with that take on tremendous responsibilities, and I think, thinking of social workers, for example, and the educators and the healthcare providers, the mental health providers, all of those folks are heavily burdened with tremendous caseloads and significant responsibilities. And I have this dream myself that someday those people that do these important jobs will not have the highest caseload. They will not have the least amount of resources. Someday I hope that'll happen in our system. But the work you're doing here, I think, in sharing is going to be helpful. It's going to help us in relieving some of that load. I've worked in the appellate court and the juvenile court, both, on issues dealing with family and children, and I've become painfully aware of the kinds of decisions that are made, including, as I had to make on one term, decide whether to turn off life support for a battered infant. It doesn't get much more close to the road than that. And we make a lot of decisions every day with inadequate information. The trial judges are constantly called upon. They have to make a decision. They have to deal with it. Do they have the information they need? And the answer is not always, and not enough. Of course, with our own problems, we sometimes don't even know what some other court in our own county has done with this particular family on an issue that's important. So I think, from my perspective, I'm always struck by this one particular concept. No child enters or leaves foster care without an order from a judge. You can't get in, you can't get out without a court order. So when we take a child into becoming a dependent or ward of the court, they become our children. In all reality, we are charged with the care and raising of that child. Hopefully we get them out of foster care into permanence, but we have over 50,000 children in foster care. That's the last numbers I looked at every day that need to be looked after. And what would you like to know about your kids? Would you like to know where they're living? Or are they going to school? That'd be good. Have they been kicked out for being truant or difficult to deal with? Do they have behavior problems? How about their health? Do they have mental health problems, physical health problems? Would you like to know that? Well, of course you would. Say, what are you talking about? Of course I'd like to know that. If you didn't know that, what kind of a parent would you be? You'd be a lousy parent, wouldn't you? Well, welcome to a group that I belong to called Lousy Parents, because we don't know too often when we have to do something. You know, bless the hearts of the social workers, they work heroically to gather up as much information as they can. And we have at the local level some blue ribbon commissions, we call them, that are working on a lot of creative ideas to encourage sharing even without the data systems that we would like to have. But in the ideal world, we would have that information, and we'd have it regularly and consistently, and it would all mean the same thing. So one day, hopefully, we'll be able to do that. We've had some success. I want to just comment on before I pass on, and is the passage of the Uninterrupted Scholars Act, which was sponsored by one of our Blue Ribbon Commission members, Congresswoman Karen Bass. Has passed, and that will allow child welfare agencies to access foster children and foster youth education records to help us deal with educational stability so that, for example, children don't lose credits towards graduation because we've moved them umpteen times and they've been pulled out of school. Something as basic as that. Assemblymember Stone has AB 643 pending in the California legislature that, if passed, will conform California's current law to the new federal law, and it's going to help child welfare workers access pupil records that are necessary. Somebody mentioned the Kool-Aid. My wife was a CASA for 10 years. I'll tell you about Kool-Aid. Because court-appointed special advocates are there. They represent these kids, and that's all they represent. And they'll tell you, and I have heard a lot of times, about issues, particularly with regard to education. So this will be a help. So we need to continue on pressing for change. The courts, we may not be up to date technologically, and we have our disadvantages, but the judicial branch, the Chief Justice, is fully committed to doing what we can to provide whatever support that we can for this process. We need it. We desperately need it. So I want to thank you for what you do for the families and the kids in our state. I'm looking forward to a time where California is going to be an example of interoperability, data sharing, because we'll do better for the people that we're responsible for. And I would just add just a note for those, there's some lawyers out here in the audience that advise agencies on issues of privacy law. And I just was listening to this, get to yes and so forth. You know, the easiest thing to do is to tell the client, don't do anything. Just say no to everything. And you can't get in trouble because you haven't violated any law. Of course, you haven't done anything for your clients. But, you know, it's the same. I encourage you, look at it. Think in terms of what your agency is there to do. How can we rationally protect the legitimate privacy interests of the children and the families that we deal with? At the same time, get us the information we need so that their lives are made better and not worse. That's the objective, not the protection of privacy regulations for their own sake. So to the extent, as you sit down and ponder this, think in terms of where we're going. If you do that, I love you for it. Anyway, thank you very much.
I'm Richard. Hello?
Hello.
Yeah. I'm Richard Gold with Stewards of Change, and on this panel, I'm the cleanup hitter. So my job is to take what Will said about how government has been created in silos and have protected the information that they have. And Justice Huffman's challenge to us that we need to get out of our comfort zone and really start looking at whoever our client is and make it client-centric. But I must go off the script and respond to Shell's beginning presentation about her movie script. Now, it continues that Shell's script is now sent to me as the movie, the mogul. And I take this script and I see a family goes to Disneyland. Father dies, mother's in the pokey, and we've got all these kids now in foster care. I asked for a holiday movie, a feel-good movie, and what do I get? A horror story. So we scratch it. The father does die, sadly. The mother is arrested, but the oldest son, the oldest child says to the younger siblings, hey, we've got a week-long pass to Disney World. Do we want to go with this social worker who I hear, the Orange County social worker is saying, I've got to find out a family for 4 kids, and if we can't, can we put 2 in one and 2 in another? And the brother says, no way, we're together. So the movie is they spend a week in Disneyland. And one day they hide in, and by the way, the title of the movie is It's a Small World. The end of the movie, mother's exonerated because you know those juries in California, they'll never convict her. And they lived happily ever after. Of course, it's a big, big money seller, and I will share credit with you, Shel. So, but now getting back to what I'm presenting, which is why is this conference going to be different than any other symposia? Excuse me. You've all gone to interoperability symposia. My hair has turned gray, and other people in this audience's hair has turned gray, talking about interoperability. And we all leave, we're very excited. Yes, we're going to do it. Yes, we're going to, the lawyers are going to beat us up. We're going to beat the lawyers up. We'll all go in front of Justice Huffman. You'll find us innocent. Well, here's the difference. We're actually going to do it this time. We're going to take an example, and between now and the next symposia, we're going to take a manual system, a group of existing data systems, and we're going to make them interoperable. This is what I've learned is called a swim lane. Now, I was a late learner how to swim, so I've got to tell you, this is new discussion for me. So let me explain what this is. This is looking at a current process that exists in California of if a child is in foster care and the doctor believes that they need to be administered psychotropic medication, they need to get permission from the judge. So each one of those boxes goes through the steps that the county social worker has to accomplish, the physician has to accomplish, the court has to accomplish, and the interaction with the parent and legal guardian. So I'm going to take a minute or so and describe what we're going to be doing. In your packet is an overnight assignment. So I also am the one who has to tell you you have to do something tonight to bring in tomorrow. I'm sorry. I really am. But if you look at this, what I'm presenting to you is described in these few pages. And the state and 5 counties worked on this use case. And it deals with breaking down the different steps that are accomplished manually today. So the first step is in the county social work, and it's completing a form called the JV 220. This is information that the county social worker completes about the demographics of the child and the family. This information is currently found in the statewide child welfare data system, the as-is system, not the to-be system that we'll refer to. So the current, today's system has this information, but the social worker has to go in and find it in the system to then write it on the form. They then send another form, 220A, to the physician. The physician now has to fill out the form, which includes the medical information. What are the diagnoses? What were the things that the doctor thought of instead of medication? Why are they prescribing medication? What are the past medications, and what are the past treatments that have been tried and failed for this child? The 220 form, which the social worker does, and the 220A form, which the doctor does, is then combined with the 221 form, which is the notice to the parents and the legal guardian and the CASA worker and other systems of the application to administer psychotropic medication to a child in foster care. That form, along with a form that's sent to the parent and legal guardian, which is the 222, is sent to the parent so that the parent has the right to oppose this application. All of those documents are then sent to the court to review, and as Justice Huffman, graciously said, sometimes the information isn't as complete as necessary. And he then is put back in that paternal role of having to make a decision for that child without the kind of information that you as a parent would want. So we now took this manual system, and what we're proposing as a proof of concept is that in the next few months, working with the good county of Alameda, along with help from Los Angeles, Santa Clara, Monterey, we had a group of counties who really helped us formulate this proof of concept. We're going to, the state has issued a request for demonstration. This has gone to the technology community, asking them to bid at no price to help us accomplish this proof of concept, to show how we can draw the information out of the statewide data system to populate the Form 220 so that the social worker doesn't have to search for the demographic and background information. We're also going to be working with, and I'm going to get this system name wrong, I think it's called MEDS, which is the statewide Medicaid payment for medications for children and adults, so that we're going to be able to draw down the history of medications that this particular youth has already tried. So that information can now be shared with the prescribing physician and populate the 220A form. The 220A form will also be populated by the doctor's electronic health record so that it doesn't have to be done manually. Those two forms will then be assembled and sent to the court in an interoperable way. It doesn't sound, it's a huge undertaking. People have been talking about this for years, and what we're saying to you is we're going to show how to do it, and we're going to show how to do it in a reusable way so that it can then be applied to 56 other counties. It's a tremendous challenge. We wish to thank Alameda for being such a wonderful volunteer. And so we will make interoperable 3 systems: the child welfare, the CYS CMS, the MEDS system, and this thing called an electronic health record, which will also produce a document called a continuity of care plan, which can be sent to the court as well. So now the court will be getting more complete, more timely information on these court forms with a very defined data set, because it's the data that's on these 4 or 5 documents. But it will be done in as interoperable of a way as possible. saving time for the social worker, saving time for the physician, and helping the prescribing physician to see what medications and at what dosage have been tried in the past, so that that doctor has a more complete picture of what they're recommending to be administered currently to the courts. So that's the example. It's a daunting one, but a very exciting one. So this proof of concept is also dealing, the first things I've talked about are interoperability. We're also giving demonstrators the opportunity to automate some of the other processes. And in your packet, what's in yellow will be interoperable, and what's green is optional for automation. So, I want to thank Shell, Dr. Scott, Gigi Smith, who has gone to another position, Larry, and Laura Beeman, who has really come in and taken this project by the horns and really run with it to get an RFD out on the street quickly, completely, with the help of OSI's procurement office. There has been interest and questions. Those questions have now been answered, so they'll go back. Very short time period in the request for demonstration. So it's really the months during the summer where we'll be working with Alameda. We'll be probably working with Children's Hospital in Alameda, who hasn't an electronic health record and works very closely with the county's child welfare system to show how interoperability can be accomplished using the present systems to make it more efficient and effective for the workers and better outcomes for the children and families. So I have several other things I have to tell you. There is another sheet following this packet with the 3 questions that you have to answer tonight. You must answer these questions because we're going to be collecting these papers tomorrow. And these papers, don't laugh, Justice, we're being very serious about this. That. Okay. I may need a court order for anyone who doesn't hand in their sheet. So granted, that's okay. We're going to be using the answers to these sheets to develop the statewide interoperability plan. So these questions don't deal with the proof of concept. They don't deal with the child welfare data system or the meds system or the electronic health record. They deal with what you do every day in your day-to-day operations, whether you work for the state, for a county, for a provider, in the university, wherever. We need the answers to these questions to help us develop the interoperability plan. So please take them seriously. This proof of concept will also deal with how do we know that the Richard Gold in the child welfare system, data system, is the Richard Gold in the med system, is the Richard Gold in the electronic health record. So the client identification issue, which is an essential issue for interoperability, will also be dealt with. And then last but not least, I had the privilege of sitting at a table with question 1. And I was the monitor. And as going through the issues raised under question 1, they brought up culture change, mistrust, funding, confidentiality and privacy, producing outcomes, being more efficient, the private sector having incentives to do things even for free, that HIPAA is a blessing. HIPAA was described as a blessing and a curse, not by a lawyer, and that laws not only tell you what you can't do, but also tells you how to do it right, and security. All of these issues will be dealt with in this proof of concept. So I think we did a good job in picking which project to begin with. So the gauntlet's thrown down to you. Answer the questions carefully, seriously, so that the statewide interoperability plan can be as complete as possible. The gauntlet's been thrown at us. Show me that this symposia is different than any other symposia, and come back with a real product. I accept the challenge. Thank you very much.
Let me ask the audience if there are questions for our panel. I've got one. I just want to, Richard, in terms of measuring the overall effectiveness, what are the measures that one uses? I think sometimes people talk about automation and get that confused with interoperability. So to what extent are we changing things to make it better significantly, rather than just paving the cow path and going through it faster?
Well, if a child comes into foster care, many times the county social worker doesn't have a lot of information about that child, just due to the circumstances of how children many times comes into foster care. So unfortunately, the studies that have been done is that the tests are done again, and the child goes through exams that they've already had, not to punish the child, but we may not know that these exams have been done. So in the area of psychotropic medication, many times we're taking a child to a physician to examine, and that physician doesn't have a lot of the background that most physicians would want when making a recommendation. They may have behaviors that are exhibited. They may not know some of the history of the family and the trauma that this child has experienced up to this point. And many times they may prescribe a medication that the child's already had in the past, and it's not worked then. And why prescribe it again, and why administer it again? Which is also a very costly process to the Medicaid system, which is now paying for this medication for the second time. And a recent study by the Government Administration Office, without making a judgment, just showed that the use of psychotropic medications for the child welfare population is about 3 times what the use of psychotropic medication is for the general Medicaid population for children of the same age. So it did raise questions. It is a national issue. This proof of care does not solve that question, but it does give people a lot more information that is available, but in other systems. So having access to that information, doctors should be able to make better judgments as to prescriptions. Children should not have to be over-medicated, and hopefully the well-being of the children can be improved.
Yes, sir.
So, kind of on the same lines, have any key performance indicators been defined to decide whether this is qualified as a successful proof of concept or not?
The question is about performance indicators.
I heard.
To what I know you heard. I'm just making sure that everybody in the corner heard. No, but to what extent are performance indicators developed, and what are they?
To decide whether it's a successful project or if it just didn't hit the mark.
Next question. No. It's a question that I think needs to be answered. Not as an excuse, but this has been an extraordinarily quick process. And I think that we as a team can go back and set performance standards so that we can measure ourselves. So we won't just be satisfied that we've accomplished the interoperability, but rather maybe compare the information we're getting out of the interoperability process to what information is normally provided without interoperability.
Anything else? Daniel?
I would just follow on to that question and the comment, link it back to Will's comment about a culture of communication. I think one of the things that this proof of concept is attempting to do is to increase the communication between the various departments and organizations that have information that are now sort of throwing it over the transom or making it available in some fashion.
And it really provides us an opportunity to focus that attention on something that is actually tangible. It's not the whole solution. This is only a piece of the whole process here, and we've extracted out a piece. So I'm not sure it's fair necessarily to identify key performance indicators on this so much as to say, can we do it? Is it possible, and can we get it done in 3 months? So part of it is we can get anything done with enough money, enough time, enough resources, right? We're setting a goal, and I don't think we should underestimate that goal, which is to get that done quickly. We can ask a lot of questions around that, and we can begin to look at the other counties that are involved and look at the comparison about whether or not this process represents Los Angeles or Santa Clara or San Mateo or any of the other counties. And so that conversation can happen. And so what I'd like to do is actually throw it back to Will and say, it's a powerful question, a powerful statement about a culture of communication. And that cuts across everything. And I just would ask you to sort of elaborate a little bit more on that and what your thoughts are on doing that. And I know that there's been some interesting action to make that happen there.
Thanks, Daniel. First, the limits to how far we've gotten, I mean, it was interesting, Richard, when he was commenting, was sort of saying, everyone's got a little element of skepticism about what can we really get done, because we've been through partial conversations in the past. And so recognizing that, I think we all bring a little bit of the, okay, so show me to this. And to some extent, I think this, I agree with Daniel that, I mean, simply showing that it can be done is in and of itself probably a impetus to keep going, and we take it in little bites. But in terms of sort of the where one hopes to get to and how, a couple of examples that I would love us to get to, and we'll see if we do. Imagine a situation where through the CWS new system and everything it might connect and bridge to, both the judge on the bench has the full range of information that Justice Huffman was describing. What would a parent want to know when making decisions for their own child? But also looking perhaps at another part of the system. When the social worker in the field in real time, using a device, is able to determine that the information being provided about who is apparently in this household is inconsistent with other information that is available to them. Would that change a safety assessment in that circumstance? It very well might. Would that be a desirable endpoint to drive to, so that the social worker in the field not only could have the information fairly complete from multiple systems, but could also add their own information and within all of the boundaries of necessary protection of information, have other professionals who are working with the child or the family know now what the child welfare worker knows at that moment. And so as I imagine a culture of communication, it's a culture that is sort of saying it is in that child's interest that we be able to access information for purposes of meeting the child's needs, not for negative, and this is where it's going to get very difficult. And not only do I see some cringes in the room, I feel the cringe in myself, which is part of living in a free society is our right to privacy. And there are things we want to protect about our own information, but as we step closer to the role of parenting, then we need to find the way of knowing information that we need to know. So, long story short, we're certainly embarked on trying to make this real. One of the things that we've been able to do in the current year is to create a position within Department of Social Services, literally to focus the department's work on horizontal integration. And we sort of created it in the director's office as an assistant director so that we could cut across all of the departments and divisions of CDSS. And we're right now in the process of sort of meeting with budget committees to get approval, we hope, for a couple of additional positions to fill out that function so that across both our public assistance side and our social services side, and then with our collaborating sister agencies and with Department of Education and law enforcement information, that we can start to pull together information so that instead of being silos of child welfare and licensing and public assistance and education and health and justice, that we are able to start not just sharing information, but meaningfully using information to assist people. So I think tomorrow you're on the Adam Dondro, who is our new assistant director of horizontal integration, is on the agenda, I believe, tomorrow. Thursday, okay. So that's one of the steps we've been able to take concretely in the current time.
Let's thank the panel one more time.